oh, well, Joe Rogan has this podcast because of this, or that actor has this because of that, or that athlete is so incredible, but he was just gifted that way. And I just think that's setting yourself up for failure, because if everybody's success is dependent on their God-given gifts and talents, and you don't feel like you have any, then there's literally nothing you can do to be successful in life. And what a horrible, horrible way to live your life. No wonder men are depressed. Kip, what's up, man? Good to see you. Obviously, I'm in a new location today, but I'm in Colorado Springs. I'm going to go visit in a couple hours John Eldridge. Awesome. And do a podcast with John, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, what a stud. Great books, good person.
Wild at Heart transformed my life, actually, and it's one of the things that set me on the path for what we're doing here with Order of Man. I remember I was actually reading it in a plane. I can't remember where I was going, and I fell asleep, but I put the book in the pouch in the seat in front of me. And then when the plane landed, I got up. I was so enthralled by this book. I got up and walked off the plane and deboarded. And I realized, oh, my book's in there. And I was so frustrated because of how excited and engaged I was in this book. So I had to buy a new one, and then I ended up having him on the podcast a couple of times. So it's been pretty cool.
How did you find out about that book? Do you remember?
I don't know. I think maybe somebody recommended it to me, it seems like. I get so many recommendations, and I've read so many books at this point, it's hard to know like where they came from. Why? Do you remember how you got recommended to it?
I'll be honest. I don't hear nothing against the book, and hopefully this doesn't come across negative, but like I've heard you promote that book, and I don't know if I've ever heard anybody else ever promote that book. I've always heard it through you and or Order of Man. I've never heard anybody reference the book outside of our community.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because somebody had made a post in the Facebook group and asked for book recommendations. And it's always a little interesting to me. Everybody recommends every book but the two that this whole movement were founded on. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're only doing that because it goes without saying they should just read the books that we put together. That book, Wild at Heart, comes up often. I think probably part of the reason too is it has a Christian undertone to it, which doesn't bother me as a believer, but I know there's a lot of guys who may choose not to read it because of that. And I think if you're able to extract the practical wisdom and application from the book, it's not really that big a deal. But some people, I think, make a bigger deal out of it than they ought to.
Yeah, I knew we had good alignment. Before I ever joined the Iron Council, I went to an uprising. I think it was the second uprising event that you threw. That was the first time that I've quote unquote engaged, with Order of Man, other than listening to the podcast. And you and Matt Harrington, you guys on our bunk beds, there was a journal, there was a hat, and then there was a copy of As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
That's another good one.
That is probably one of my all-time favorite books. And the minute I saw that book, I thought, I'm gonna get along with these guys really well. If that's cool. If that's a giveaway book for sure.
If that's their reading material. Well, the way you said it, you're like, you and Matt Arrington were sitting on my bed, and I just had this like vision of just draped on when you walk into your room, we're just like draped all over your bed.
Yeah, and I knew I belonged.
And As a Man Thinketh is covering the sensitive parts, but everything else full nude. You're like, here you go. Why don't you open this, Kip?
Oh shoot! I'm envisioning a social media post from you. Ryan's top 5 book recommendations, and it's As a Man Thinketh covering your junk and the rest of you naked. It's going to be great. You should do that.
All right. Well, on that note, let's get into some questions today.
Yeah. So we're going to field questions from the Iron Council. To learn more about the Iron Council, go to orderman.com/Iron Council. We're going to be opening enrollment for Q2 in roughly about 3 days, 2 to 3 days, on the 15th of March. So
the 15th. And then on the 17th, we have a preview call. Yep. So if you go to theironcouncil.com/preview, the night of the 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern, we have a preview call. And we pull back the curtain a little bit and let guys know what we're all about and give them a sneak peek into what we're doing. So that way they're making informed decisions.
Yeah. Yep. Excellent. All right. So our first question, Alan Placer. This question rubbed me wrong. I'm going to see if this question rubs you wrong or not.
Alan has a way of doing that sometimes to me too, and we banter and bicker quite often. He's like, we're like an old married couple.
Yeah, so good one, Alan. All right, Alan Placer, do you feel your kids are better off living in the current environment, or if you guys had played, or if you guys had stayed married for the kids?
Yeah, and I saw this question, and it's a little bit of a... Well, it's a hard one to answer. I also think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, too. I'll talk about it from the context of my specific situation. I can't say they're better off. How could I say that? It's not good for kids to be separated to any degree from their mom or their dad. So the answer to that half of the question is no, of course it's not ideal. Ideal would be they'd be in a nuclear family, they'd be at home with mom and dad, they'd have the influence and insight and wisdom and input from both parents, working together, communicating effectively, loving each other. I mean, that's ideal, right? We all know that. Do I believe in the premise of staying together for the kids? I know that's not the question he's asking, but that's the answer I'm going to give. Again, I don't think it always comes down to that. I think there's ways to nurture a relationship that might have fractures and ripples and frustrations and contentions if both parties are working together and they decide, hey, you know what? We should work on staying together. And part of the reason we should do that is because we have kids together.
Yeah.
So having kids together is a reason to stay together. Is it enough? Not always. And it takes two parties to decide if they're going to engage to that degree or not. But ideally, yes, kids would be at home with mom and dad. And I think there's a lot of people who could probably work on their marriage who have simply resigned to staying together for the kids. If you're going to stay together for the kids, go all in. Yeah. Because it's also good for your kids to see you having a difficult time in relationships and then mending the ruptures is what I've heard it called. I had, oh gosh, his name escapes me. John Kim. Is it John Kim? Gosh, his name escapes me on the podcast. And he's a relationship coach and a therapist. And he said in a lot of research that he's done, he's seen that relationships that have ruptures in them, where both parties are able to repair the ruptures, end up being more fulfilling, more long-lasting, and better off than relationships that don't have any of that fragmentation or that confrontation or conflict like other relationships do. That's why I always get a chuckle when I hear people say, "Oh, I never fight with my wife." I can't even wrap my head around that. Like, are you guys being honest with each other? That's what comes to mind for me. If you're not fighting every once in a while or bickering or getting upset with each other, I'm not saying go to blows by any means, but if you don't have conflict, I kind of believe that you're lying to each other and you're trying to be what the other person wants you to be and you're not even being yourself.
Or you're not addressing the things, right? You're just skirting around them. Yeah. Yeah. John Kim, about 2 months ago. So John Kim, How a Man Leads in Relationships is the episode name.
Yeah, so that's how I'm going to choose to answer that question. It might be a little bit of a controversial one. But again, staying together for the kids, I think it's got some validity based on the circumstances. And I also think there's probably times where, at least for me, that there would be boundaries or hard stops in a relationship.
For sure.
Infidelity would be one of those things. And abuse. And I'm talking about mostly physical abuse, sexual abuse, like things like that, where that can't be tolerated. But that's mine. Those are my boundaries as far as like permanent end to the relationship. But everybody has different boundaries.
Yeah, totally. No, you answered it exactly how I'd hope you would. I can't stand this mentality, right? And I'm not saying Alan has this mentality, but I've heard this so many times, right? It's like, well, it's better off that we're happy. You know, our kids are better off with two happy parents than us staying together. And it's like, or what they deserve best is two happily married parents, right? This isn't, you know, and translation, all in, that exactly what you said. Whatever it is that you're about, that you're doing, be all in and do it right. So if it's married, be all in. If it's in a job, well, you know, is it better that I'm happy in my job or I'm stable for my family? Actually, it's good to be all in at the job and be successful and happy, right? And we create these false dichotomies to justify our lack of showing up in the thing that we're dealing with. So anyone that's listening is like, oh yeah, trust me, you're probably creating the false dichotomy to justify how you're showing up in the marriage, how you're showing up in the job. So then that way you don't have to put the work into it.
Well, I also think there's more important values than being happy. And I believe that this is one of the things that really separates men from boys. Yeah. Boys are very selfish. They're very short-term, immediate gratification. A lot of men are that way too, but those are immature men, I would call them. And they're seeking the next best thing. They're always filtering their decisions through what's going to be best for me. How am I going to be the happiest?
Yeah.
Right. But there's a couple of things that come to mind right off the bat. I think honor is more important than happiness. I think duty and responsibility are more important than happiness. Yeah. And I also think that my goal is not really to be happy. The way I view happiness is this absence of conflict or strife. You know, you retire, for example, and you sit on the beach and you're sipping Mai Tais and you're just enjoying the sun and your vacation. And I could be happy in that moment for a while, for sure. But I choose to pursue fulfillment, which is not the absence of struggle and conflict, but the ability to engage in meaningful struggle and then making yourself capable of handling it the way that a virtuous man would.
Yeah, totally.
And in those moments, we can be happy with ourselves. We can be happy around other people, but that's a little different. And it might be semantics, but I think it's important people understand the distinction from where I see it.
Yeah, I always love the phrase, a life of fulfillment, meaning, and purpose. And sometimes that looks hard. It looks kind of miserable sometimes with moments of happiness and bliss, right? But it comes with a life of minimal regret.
Yeah. Well, I was even thinking about this, and again, I'm in Colorado Springs today, and I'm leaving tomorrow morning, and I came in last night late, so it's a very quick trip, and I don't particularly enjoy the travel process. I get stressed out when I have to pack, and I get irritable, like trying to figure out all the things I need. It's not enjoyable to me. And then traveling and sitting in the airport. I mean, I don't know that there's many people that do like it, but I do it because it's part of the mission, and it's what the mission of Order of Man requires of me. So I do it, not because it makes me happy, but because there's a sense of duty and obligation to it.
Yeah, love it. Jeremy Kofi, what's something you see men overcomplicating that actually has a simple solution?
Oh, exercise and nutrition. That's easy. Like it is amazing to me how complex we have made nutrition. Like it's easy. Eat your body weight in grams, your ideal body weight in grams of protein. Eat a cup of vegetables and a cup of rice, and drink 2 times your body weight. No, excuse me. Half your body weight in ounces per day.
Of water.
Of water.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not of like whiskey or something, but water. And that's it. You don't need to do the vegan diet, the carnivore, the paleo, the this, the that. No, it's just 3 round meals, maybe 5, depending on your metabolism and the things that you're doing. And you might tweak and adjust that based on different events that you have coming up. And then exercise. I mean, go to the gym and just look at what people are doing. They're there, and I'll give them credit for that. But some of the things that people do with regards to their exercise, just go lift heavy. That's it. Just lift as heavy as you can. Get really good at bench, squat, deadlift, pull-ups, maybe some ab exercises in there, and then put in some accessory work along with it. If you want to be a runner, I've been running more. I actually went on a run this morning. It was cool. I went on a run around this neighborhood, and the road I'm on is called Mule Deer Trail or something. And I'm like, oh, that's a cool name. And I'm running up the road, and I see 5 massive mule deer, 3 bucks, 2 does. 2 of them were, one in particular was incredible. He's a huge buck. Anyways, I got off on a tangent when it comes to like hunting and animals for a second. But yeah, I just went on a run for this morning. Like, that's it. Just do what you want to be good at. And that's easy. But I do have another one, because maybe those are throwaways, nutrition but I think the other one is communication. I think we as men have such a difficult time with just being straightforward, expressing ourselves, telling people how we feel in a respectful way. We're trying to game it. We're trying to read other people, manipulate other people, withhold information. You even see this in the space of these guys who are like the pickup artist guys, about how you're supposed to bring scarcity to this so that a woman finds you more attractive. And if you treat her like crap, then she'll be more attracted to you. I'm like, this stuff is nonsense to me. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I put it all out there, and you can take it or you can leave it. And I'd rather know early, especially in a relationship, if you don't like what I have to say, or you don't like my opinions, or you don't like how I communicate, I want to know that soon. But I will say with communication, there's one other thing that a man needs to learn to do really well, is don't complain. You can be upset about things. You can have frustrations about things. And there might be a time and a place to express some of those in certain environments. But for the most part, anytime you're upset about a thing, you should always have something that you're working on and be able to communicate that with the other party. Yeah. So if it's your romantic partner and you're frustrated about your lack of physical connection lately, then you should be able to communicate that with your partner and say, but here's what I propose, here's what I'd like to do, or here's how I'd like to engage. If you're at work and it's not going well at work, instead of just coming to your supervisor or your boss and say, hey, this isn't working because X, Y, and Z, I think that's appropriate. As a boss, I would want to know why it's not working, but then come to me with also solutions. Totally. Hey, Ryan, this is not working because of X, Y, and Z, and what I propose is to do A, B, and C. So as a man, I just don't think that you should be crying and complaining and bickering and moaning without at least having some idea of what you want to do. And you know, one other thing on that, a lot of guys have said in the past, when I say, hey, give me, like, what's your idea? I've heard a lot of guys say, well, if you knew what to do, you wouldn't be asking the question. And I actually don't think that's true at all. I think there's things that he's tried. I think there's things that are already probably going through his mind. I think what most people are looking for, maybe not most, but a lot of people are looking for when they're asking for advice, is they're looking for validation.
Yeah, some reassurance.
For their poor performance, or am I doing the right thing? And I'm not saying that's bad necessarily, but I think that you ought to always look for paths forward, even if you don't entirely know what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny, when I read this question, the first thing that crossed my mind is just how we overcomplicate situations by doubling down on all the things that are outside of our realm of control versus identifying the things within our control. Like, that's where I see, like, well, any upset, like, pick any scenario by which you're not liking how it's going, and the average person will tell you all the things that are outside their control. But what they won't tell you are all the things that they can control, but they've chose to overlook because they would rather have this elaborate issue that they can't deal with, that they get a complaint about, versus getting to the thing that they can do something about. And I see it as an overcomplication of the scenario, which, what does it do? Causes us not to communicate. Why? Well, there's nothing for me to communicate, Ryan. I'm not the problem. They are, right? And so I
have that guy
stonewall.
communicate.
Yeah, I'll hold it in, and then I'll just bitch, moan, and complain about the circumstance because obviously there's nothing for me to do. And we do it all the time, right? And anyone listening that's like, oh, I don't do that. It's like, okay, well, let me point out the areas by which you're probably doing it. Any area of your life that you have an upset where you're waiting and hoping for someone else to do something, where you're allocating blame, where you have a story around why you're not doing what you're doing, it's because of X, Y, Z, and where you're not self-evaluating around your role in it. And right now, like, even though I'm fully aware of this for myself, I could tell you a handful of things that I know I am being somewhat of a victim around. It's crazy. And we do it all the time, and it's highly disempowering.
There's another area I've seen people do this, and it's, you gave those couple of examples. One example I had is when you're discounting people's success. People will do that all the time, like, oh man, Kip is so successful in business, but I'd be successful too if I had X,
If
Y,
I was
and Z,
raised on a dairy farm in Elsinore, Utah.
Right, and I had these devilishly good looks, and I had the perfect ability to communicate, none of which are true, but that's what.
If I saw Ryan naked with a book, I would have also been successful.
But that is what people do, though. They always do that. Like,
Totally.
Oh, well, Joe Rogan has this podcast because of this, or that actor has this because of that, or that athlete is so incredible, but he was just gifted that way. And I just think that's setting yourself up for failure, because if everybody's success is dependent on their God-given gifts and talents, and you don't feel like you have any, then there's literally nothing you can do to be successful in life.
Yeah.
And what a horrible, horrible way to live your life. No wonder men are depressed.
Yep. And this is why they do it. So then that way I'm not held accountable for my shitty life. It's like, I got dealt the bad cards, Ryan. It's not my fault. I just wasn't lucky enough.
I like what you said, though, about elaborate excuses. That's actually really good. I wrote that down because there's just these elaborate, sophisticated
Stories. Yeah.
And they sound pretty good. And you actually want to know why they sound good is because when we lie to ourselves or to other people, there's always a little tinge of truth. And there has to be. There has to be a little bit of truth, because if there wasn't any truth, everybody, including yourself, would spot the lie immediately. Yeah. So what we do is we conflate a little bit of truth with the fiction, and then we paint it all as fictional. Or factual, I guess I should say.
Yeah. I had this, and it's been years. It was probably about, I don't know, maybe even like 18 years ago. I was taking this course, and I don't remember the way the facilitator got us into this, conversation, but it was so powerful. And you end up writing your story, your sob story. Right. And I had a good one, right? Like, it was solid, woe is me. I was raised this way, and my parents this, and I didn't have opportunity. You know what I mean? It was like this 2-page, like, dramatized story that was like this big badge that I used, to justify my existence in the world. And so you write this whole thing down, and then they break you up and they're like, all right, now read it out loud to someone else. And you read it out loud to them like 20 times, right? And as you can imagine, what happens around the 20th time, you're like, this is pathetic, right? Like, you start, like, you're really embarrassed, you're like, this is so dramatized. It was such a great experience, because you realize, like, man, this is just all just drama that you've held on to. It was good.
It is. Yeah. That's a good exercise, actually.
Yeah. All right.
What's next?
Robbie Leffel, are you currently on a battle team? Do you have a battle plan? Do you have an old vision you are still working off of, or have you written it recently? I'm curious how the leaders of the IC participate in the Iron Council outside of your leadership and ownership roles. So kind of like a little bit of inside of the leadership of the Iron Council.
Yeah, I'm on a battle team, so Battle Team Appella. And if guys are listening, they might say, what's a battle team? So what we do inside the Iron Council, because there's 1,100 men, when we started to get bigger, it lost some of the intimacy and accountability that we're trying to build into our programs. So we decided, okay, we'll create these battle teams. And these are teams of anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15 guys who are all working together to refine their battle plans, hold each other accountable, call, check in on each other, share stories, share insights, learn from each other, push, etc. So yes, I am, and you are too, Kip, on a battle team. It's called Battle Team Appella, and we operate that very much like another battle team. There is a little bit of difference because we talk about Iron Council related directives and leadership, things like that. But outside of that, yeah. And I talk with you and Jay and Alan and all these guys, Wayne and Gatch and Drew, on a weekly basis. Some of it's personal and some of it's professional, just based on what's going on or what we're doing. But every single one of us operate just like a traditional battle team would. So we all have our battle plans. We submit those to each other. We hold each other accountable. We ask how they're going. We ask where the hangups are. We have a couple of guys on the team now who are dealing with personal struggles, nothing major, but there's just like I do now and then, life. And so, yeah, so it operates. There's not really much more to it. I mean, we operate it just like a battle team. As far as, let's see, what was the other question? Have I worked a new vision?
Yeah. Or are you working off of something old? Yeah. Or rewritten it recently?
No, so I go through it every quarter because that's when I do my planning. And I would say 90 to 95% of my vision stays about the same, but based on external circumstances or changes in my life or responses that I need to make in relationships that I have, that vision will change over time slightly, but it's never drastic. I do like to refresh it because for me, it becomes a little mundane over time and monotonous. And what ends up happening when it is a monotonous plan is it's just not as emotionally compelling. And it doesn't push me anyways forward like maybe it once did. So it's good for me to do a refresh, to use some different verbiage, to take new experiences I've learned in life or in the last quarter, adopt and embrace those into my vision. So yeah, I look at that every single quarter. I'm not asking guys to do anything that I don't do. I think that would be unreasonable. And I have in the past, just like we all have, maybe even a little hypocritical at times. But yeah, I'm working the plan just like you guys are.
Love it. Okay, Jake Thompson. We'd love to hear any advice you have for new supervisors or managers. I've been recently promoted and will now be leading my former peers. For context, none of them applied for the position, and they were involved in the decision to promote me, so I don't expect that there'll be any issues of me getting promoted over them. Yeah,
I mean, well, first of all, congratulations. That's important.
Yeah.
And also, I commend you for what you're saying about not being any issues and looking at it like that. I would still say that even in you saying that leads me to believe that you're thinking that there might be issues.
Yeah.
And I think you should get that out of your head. Because if you want to find a problem, or if you think there's a problem, you will find a problem. So if in your mind, like, oh, this is going to be hard.
Find evidence.
There's going to be challenges. There's going to be people who are giving me pushback. There are going to be people who don't like my leadership style. You're going to start poking at people, looking for the reasons why what you're saying is coming true. And I'm not asking you to be oblivious to what's going on, but don't set yourself up for that. But what I would say is, as a leader and someone who has been led by other people, the greatest leaders that I've ever had are the ones that are humble and are the ones who continue to involve me, their team member, their lower down line, I don't know what you want to call their employee, like whatever you want to call it. They continue to include me in the process, and they know they don't have it figured out. And so leadership, from where I see it anyways, is not that you are out in front of everybody all the time and you have to do it and you have to know better than everybody else. No, as a leader, your job is just to make sure the initiatives get done.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure it gets done. And that requires you being a team player. It requires you asking for advice from your team members when you don't know, or even if you do know, still asking for advice and input. I mean, ultimately, you have to make the decisions as the supervisor in your position. But I think the more that you can involve other people, your former peers, the better off that you're going to be. And that's what I would suggest, is just keep them involved in the process. There's a quote here that I found that I really like. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. And that's from Simon Sinek. So you are not in charge. Your responsibility now is to take care of those people and to serve those people, and then obviously serve the business and your employer and your clients.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I mean, the thing I wrote down was you got to shift your focus originally as an individual contributor was the work getting done. And you have to shift on the mindset of serving them to get the work done, right? And your sole role is to help them win. And winning is obviously sometimes you having difficult conversations with them and making sure that they're being successful and all those other things. But if I had to paraphrase it, your team needs to know that you're there to ultimately help them win. And if they see you that way, then it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can be humble. You're the guy that's there to help them get through the struggles, help them navigate difficulty so they can be successful. And you need them to know that and understand that that's your role. Until then, it's now you just flexing authority. It will be perceived as manipulation or something else. And so move to that as soon as possible. And leaders,
I think that's good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one other thing that was interesting in here is it sounds like his peers had a hand, or at least some say in the decision-making process of who should be promoted, which I think is cool. That's a great testament to how they feel about you.
Totally.
If I were in your shoes, I would ask them. If, Kip, I knew that you had something to do with my promotion, I would say, hey, Kip, well, first of all, I want to thank you for the support and the belief in me. I don't know that I deserve it, but for some reason you feel like there's something, and I want to be a good leader. I want to be good in this position. I want all of us to win. Do you mind sharing with me why you decided to throw your support behind me? And let them tell you they're going to tell you what they want from you. And then you might even say that, here's another question. Man, that's really good feedback. Thank you for that. Is there anything when you were considering throwing your support behind me that was maybe a bit of a red flag or you had some concerns with? And you might say, well, you're a hard worker, but you don't communicate really all that well. Okay, well, I need to know that because I want to make sure I communicate with you guys well. So I think if you ask your guys those two questions, whether they threw their support behind you or not, that actually would be pretty insightful, I would think.
Totally. Yeah, I think the more you can get to the perspective of meeting with every team member and saying, hey, are you loving the job? How are you feeling about things? Are you excited about being here? You know, get to the point of the discussion where you're just getting clear on their job love, if you want to use that term. And then say, what's your primary objectives? And what are the number one things that are blocking you from being successful? And how can I help? You do that with every single team member, they're like, walk away out of that meeting going, got it, Ryan's got my back. Like, his focus isn't about telling me what to do. He's asking what he can do for me. Yeah, good stuff.
Just make sure when you do that you maintain the consistency in doing that, because it's easy to be really excited about your new position.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there's a lot of performative stuff in that I've seen people do where they're the new leader and they're like, I'm going to ask these questions, and it's not real sincere, and it burns out within a matter of days, if not weeks.
Yeah.
So if you are going to ask those questions and talk to your people like that, which I suggest that you do, make sure it's not a one-time thing. Make sure that you're continually checking in on them and following up with them and outside of the scope of the work they're doing.
Yeah, love it. Gavin Masurley, as stepfathers, we often find ourselves in the shadows of bio dads. whether or not they're present in
Biotats.
their lives, while walking the line of holding him accountable and trying not to rock the boat and avoiding the dreaded words of "you're not my dad." I find it difficult to connect on a subsurface level. I've recently come to the conclusion that living by example is likely the best way. Let him see me working out, exhibit controlling my temper and emotions, show him how he should treat a woman by loving his mom to the best of my abilities. Is this enough, or is there something else I could or should do?
I don't think living by example's enough. I used to think that. I used to be one of those guys that would always say, oh, just be the example, be the example, be the example. That's crucial. But especially with not just kids, everybody, they're making connections about your behavior that you're not even aware of. And they have no idea why you're doing a certain thing unless you communicate it with them. So when you're loving on his mom, it's important for you to say, hey, I love you guys. You know, maybe you're sitting at dinner and you say, hey, I just want you guys to know I love you guys. Like, I love these moments, this time together. And I don't know if you know, but I really love your mom because of these 3 things. This goes back to communication. You have to communicate it. Yeah. Or when you're having to instill some discipline, you know, maybe he did something he shouldn't have done, or maybe he yelled at mom or whatever it may be. You know, you can't just punish the kid. You have to explain why you're doing this out of a love and care for him. And there's another thing, and I'm not in this boat. I've not been a stepdad, so I don't know. But I have been a stepson, and it can be a real challenge. One of the things I learned early in my retail sales career is that anytime you perceive or think there might be an objection, just bring it up.
Yeah.
Just bring it up first. So how do you diffuse the "you're not my dad"? By saying, hey, look, I know this is a hard thing for us, and I know I'm not your father. And that can be hard for you because you might feel a disconnect between the way that I have to raise you as your stepfather and the way that maybe your dad raises you or doesn't raise you, or the way that you feel about him. And I want you to know I really value the relationship that you have with your father. I think that's important. I'm not here to replace. I'm here to add to. And everything that I do comes from a place of love. When you start having those conversations and you just bring it up first, how can the kids say, well, you're not my dad? I mean, I know, I literally just said, I'm not your dad. So you can diffuse that by bringing these concerns up ahead of time and then explaining in a rational, loving, kind way where you're coming from. Because obviously, just by the nature of you asking this question, you really care about him, you love his mom, and you want this to be a successful family dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. Contrasting is what they call that. That's a powerful concept for every difficult
When you bring up an
conversation.
objection?
Yeah.
Contrasting? Really?
Yeah, so
okay.
if I'm going to have a difficult conversation with you and I'm afraid that you're going to, let's say, emotionally react in a negative way, then that's how I start off the conversation. Hey, Ryan, here's the intent of the conversation. Where I don't want it to go is my fear is that you will perceive this as me not caring or whatever, and you just address it immediately, right? And you just address the contrasting issue up front, right, to help mitigate the issue from occurring. So
there was a podcast I did with I think he's a trial attorney, but he's focused on communication. His name's Jefferson Fisher, and he talks about this when you have to have a difficult conversation. The example we were using, if I remember correctly, was something at work, having to let somebody go. And so if you bring them into the office, you got to give them a chance to process it, but you have to do it honestly. So if I brought you in, I might say, Kip, this is not going to be a comfortable conversation for either of us.
Yeah.
It's going to be uncomfortable,
yeah,
and it's going to be challenging. And I just want you to know ahead of time, but I also want to have a level of respect towards each other as we have this conversation. Yeah. Like, give that person a little bit of like, okay, brace yourself. Like, yeah. And then you say, hey, we have to let you go, or whatever the situation is.
Totally.
Because what most people will do is they'll say, so Kip, like, how you been? How's your family? How's your family? Oh, good. Your wife's good. Oh, your kids are good. Oh, you just put in a new pool. Oh man, that must have been expensive. That's awesome. Great job. By the way, you're fired. Like, but, and then on the tail end, it's like, but we really appreciate you and you're a good person. Like, don't do that to people.
Dude.
Just be honest.
Well, and the sandwich and the old school sandwich method,
that's
what
right,
it does. Yeah, people end up leaving and they're like, I'm not sure if I got promoted or I got fired, right? Because
exactly.
He was telling me all these wonderful things I'm doing, but then he said terminated as well, and then was like really grateful that I was there. I'm confused, right?
Yeah. But I think the same thing is you can do the same thing with kids. You know, like I've done that with my kids. Hey, I have to have a serious conversation with you guys about something. Nobody's in trouble. But we need to come to some agreements about the way that we treat each other. We did this just a couple of weeks ago. Some agreements about the way we've been treating each other in the house.
Totally. Well, and what's great about this is certain kids will appreciate this more than other kids. I was the kind of kid that would appreciate this, by the way. And I have one daughter that operates this way. But if I know something's coming, like literally yesterday I did this with her. I grabbed her, my other daughter, I pulled them in the room and said, hey guys, I want to be really clear. Mom's going to have you go to that event tonight. You might as well start processing it now and get okay with it and don't get sideways when she brings it up later. And they're like, okay. And then they had 4 hours, right? And so mom's like, let's go to that thing. And they're like, okay. But mark my word, if I didn't prep them, do we have to?
Meltdowns.
Meltdowns. Yeah. I'm like, give them a heads up. Give them some time, you know what I mean, to deal with it, and they'll do a much better job. I have something for Gavin, if you don't mind, Gavin. And there's one of my favorite books in regards to relationship with it. It played a pivotal part in my relationship with my son, my stepson, and it's the book called The Anatomy of Peace by Arbinger Institute, and it was a great book. It was critical. And let me just summarize my biggest takeaway from that book. It is that I am in zero position to coach him or correct him until I'm in a position of influence. How do I get myself in a position of influence? Number one, I have to see him as whole and complete. Love him where he is. Separate him from his actions. Number two, I have to establish a relationship with him. I have to have a relationship with him, which means we can go over to that. Like, how do I do that? Well, it's spending time with them and getting to know them and all those other things. Then I need to be in a relationship with those in influence with him, his friends. It's really hard to influence your kid when his buddies hate you. A lot easier when his buddies think you're cool. Easier to have a relationship with that stepson when you and mom are on the same page. If you have an issue with mom, trust me, your influence on him is going to weigh, right? So relationship with those of influence. 4, you need to listen and learn from him. What's going on in his world? Who is he? What is he processing? Not correct any of it, just listen and learn. And after all that, you're in a position of influence to coach. And I think we have to be careful. We talk about this mostly with adults sometimes, right? Being the lighthouse. It's like, hey, I'm just going to lead by example and come what may. If people see my greatness, awesome. If they don't, they don't. That's on them. There's a little bit more, right? People need to know you love them. And this boy won't know you love him by default just because you're being an amazing husband and father in the house. That's not personable enough. Being a superficial figure on Instagram doesn't mean any of those people love me. They're great models, and I might want to go in that direction, but it doesn't mean anything about me. And kids need to know, in their world, they think everything's about them. So they need to know that you love them. And that requires you to go through those steps of influence.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add on this one, Kip, is make sure you honor the type of relationship he wants to have with his father.
Absolutely.
Even if his father is a piece of work and maybe he's not around, that kid, and it's natural, wants to have a good father.
Yeah.
Wants their father to be amazing, wants their father to be involved in their lives, wants their father to behave a certain way. And I'm not saying you need to like blow smoke up his ass and pretend that his dad is, God's gift to the world. Yeah. But when the kid says, hey, I love my dad, that's not a time for you to get offended or upset that he has a good relationship or wants to have a relationship. Just honor that to the degree that you can. Like, hey, that's good. Like, I want you to have a good relationship with your dad. Or maybe he tells you about the weekend and he did something with his dad and inside it kind of stings a little because you're like, man, I've been doing that for years and the dad shows up and does it and all of a sudden he gets all his credit and then that stings you a little bit. So fine. It's fine. Good. Yeah. And then you honor it. So like, oh, that's awesome. You guys went on that hike. That's really cool. What'd you think about it? I love that hike. Tell me about it. Just honor it and let go of the spitefulness. And I know it can be challenging. And I haven't seen it again from the perspective you're in. I've seen it from the kids' side. And as I get older, I can see how, with my mom, like things I'd say about my dad, I'm like, ooh, that must have stung to her, Yeah. Now that I'm older and see it. But totally. She was always pretty gracious about that.
Yeah, make it about the kid. Well, and yeah. you said something like, regardless of how this guy shows up, I just have to add this. And also regardless of what mom thinks. Because like, and I don't mean to put her on blast, Gavin, but like a lot of women believe that like, they can find this new guy and he's dad replacement. Like, oh, I'll just replace dad with this other guy. And she'll try to like, some women will try to steer the relationship in a way that like, little Bobby, I got you a new dad. Like he's your dad now. Super damaging. And some women will try to do that and they're in the wrong. Absolutely in the wrong, and it's not what's best for their kids. They're selfishly trying to reform a family so they feel better about the circumstance, and it's not about what's best for little Timmy. What's best for little Timmy is to have a strong relationship with his biological father. They just don't want to accept that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some women can be that way for sure, but yeah. I also think there's a desire for women and men and even children for a new dynamic, something they've wanted to have. And if you can make that healthy, and it sounds like you are, then there's merit and value in that as well, but not at the expense or replacement of their biological father.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Elijah Elliott, Ryan, how has the IC affected you in regards to the building process, all the time and effort you have put into it, the men it has brought into your life? I personally have benefited tremendously, and I thank you and all the men I've been involved with for that. And I'm very curious to know, you being involved since the very beginning, what have you learned and how has it changed your perspective? How has this adventure shaped you as a man?
That's a lot.
Tell us your life.
Yeah. Well, I often say that it's like those old Rogaine commercials or hair plugs for men or whatever, where the guy's like, I'm not only the president, I'm a client. Remember those?
Yeah.
That's how I feel. Like, yeah, I founded Order of Man, but I'm in many ways, the biggest beneficiary and recipient of it too. And the amount of people I get to talk with, like you and Elijah and, other people like John Eldridge today and other people that we've had on the podcast, like the amount of people that I get to talk with is incredible. And I think that's one thing that I really didn't realize the importance of is a network. Everywhere I go, I can meet with people, or occasionally if I'm at the airport, somebody might bump into me and say, hey man, are you Ryan? I was at a box lacrosse game in Vegas a couple of months ago, and I was sitting there with my son, and a guy came up and he's like, are you Ryan? I'm like, yeah. He's like, Ryan Mickler? I'm like, yeah. He's like, Ryan Mickler with Order of Man? Yep. And he was there, him and his wife were there watching the game, and they had this cute little daughter. She must have been 1 or 2 years old. And we talked for a minute. And so to be able to be instrumental and helpful in those people's lives is incredible to me. And it also lights a fire under me at times when I know I'm slacking off or not doing what I need to be doing or tempted to stray or whatever it might be, to really think about what people need of me and how I need to show up, because the stakes are pretty high. You know, if I stay on top of myself physically, personally, mentally, emotionally, then I have a greater capacity to serve the people around me. And that's my kids, that's my girlfriend, that's her daughter, it's you guys, it's guys in the Iron Council, it's people who haven't found us yet. So yeah, I need to be at the top of my game. And I'm not, but I'm striving to be, and always trying to fix things as I slip or fall behind, is just getting back on top of it. So it's there's a lot of accountability built into the position I sit within the organization.
Yeah, totally. I had in the Iron Council, we have these all hands calls on Fridays. And last Friday, for whatever reason, connected in a way more than I mean, they're always great calls, but last Friday's was really, really good. And one of the things that we talked about on that Friday call is, what's the probable future? What's the probable future if Ryan doesn't level up? What's the probable future if you don't put on the mantle of it matters how you show up in the world and how it affects other people? What's the probable future for the guy listening that decides, you know what, my health isn't important? What's the probable future for the guy that stays in the marriage half-assed for the kids? Right? Like, guys, like, you know, and that was like my takeaway on Friday is like, what's at stake? And the answer is a ton of things. And thus why this conversation, the Order Man, the podcast, the Iron Council, why this is all so critical. I mean, that's the game that you took on, Ryan. You took on that level of game, and it's awesome. And it's so important.
I agree. I mean, but it doesn't matter at what scale it is either. I think sometimes we tend to look at that and think, well, you know, in order to make my dent in the universe, I have to serve this many people. I don't think so. Serve one person, serve the kids under your roof. If you serve them well, that's a win. Or your wife well, that's a win. Or the widowed woman who lives next door, that's a win.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you want to create a large dent, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. If you want to have a positive impact on as many people as you possibly can in this world, that's valiant. That's a good thing. But you can't do that until you can help the people closest to you.
Totally.
And then once you learn to really help the people closest to you, your capacity and your ability to expand your network and to serve other people grows and grows and grows and grows. But what I've seen a lot of guys do is they have this desire, and it's not always righteous or virtuous. It's a lot of times very selfish, this desire to have this notoriety or these accolades of reaching millions and millions of people. And they do it on a very surface level. But then when you scale back to the closest relationships they have, they're complete garbage. And it's not real. It was just all a facade. And so, yeah, you served lots of people in a very shallow way. But I think what we ought to do is work on serving fewer people in a much deeper, richer way. And then that influence expands from there.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you tied that to growth. In fact, I had this conversation with one of my daughters yesterday, was you got to win where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And most people approach difficulty with where they need to go. Oh, got it. This job sucks. I need to find a new job. We talked about this even last week. Or things are difficult. So, you know, what's this external thing that needs to change? Back to being a victim versus how do I win where I am? Win where you are. And that's the lesson to be taught. That's the opportunity for growth right then. And we often overlook it. and think that, some other circumstance needs to change, and that's the issue. When in reality, all that we need to do is learn.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Then we expand.
Cool.
I love it, brother. I have a hard stop. So are you good if we wrap up?
Yeah, we'll call it a day today. We got lots of good questions, and I think we've got some that I think went through all the ones in the Iron Council, and then we'll go over to Facebook maybe next week.
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Great. So big call to actions, I think, are one, the Iron Council opening up this month on the 15th. We have the preview call on the 17th. That's Order of Man. That's ironcouncil.com/preview.
The Iron Council. theironcouncil.com/preview.
And then the Men's Forge event, which is the mensforge.com, and that's May 1st through the 4th to sign up for that as well.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Lots of stuff going on. Hopefully we're going to see you in the Iron Council. We'll see you at the Men's Forge. It's going to be a very cool event, and we got a lot of cool things coming up in 2025. So guys, appreciate the questions, appreciate the support, appreciate you listening to my maybe hopefully not too bad audio here. But we make things work as we can. So that John Eldridge interview will be coming out in the next week and a half as well. So stay tuned for that. All right, guys, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.